It was Christmas morning, and the grand hall sparkled with golden lights, crystal ornaments, and laughter echoing through my billionaire son's mansion. Gifts wrapped in silk paper and diamond-studded ribbons lay piled high under the towering tree. When it was finally my turn, my son walked toward me with a strange smile. Everyone leaned in, expecting something extravagant, but instead, he placed a tiny envelope in my hands. Inside was a $1 bill. The room fell silent. My heart sank. My son, a man with private jets and yachts, had given his own mother $1. I forced a smile, but my hands trembled. Then I caught sight of my daughter. Her face had turned white, her eyes darting nervously as if a secret had just slipped into the open. Something was very, very wrong. I often wonder how two people, mother and son, can live such different lives, as if they were born into two separate worlds. My life has always been simple, ordinary, even humble. His, on the other hand, glitters with wealth, extravagance, and power. And yet, on Christmas, our two worlds always collide. I was born in a small town where winters were harsh and fireplaces were our only luxury. My father was a factory worker, my mother a homemaker who stretched every dollar like it was gold. Growing up, Christmas was never about expensive gifts. We didn't have much, but what we had was love. I remember handmade scarves, cookies baked from scratch, and the way our tiny living room glowed when my parents lit a single string of lights across the window. That was Christmas for me. Simple, pure, warm. As I grew older, I carried those values into my own family. I worked hard, sometimes 2 jobs at once, to provide for my children. I didn't care about being rich. I cared about teaching kindness, gratitude, and resilience. My son, however, had bigger dreams. He wanted more than survival. He wanted wealth, prestige, influence, and I couldn't fault him for that. Every mother wants her children to aim higher, but I never imagined how far the distance between us would grow. When he was in his 20s, he struck gold with his investments. Soon after, his life transformed into something unrecognizable. Yachts, mansions, cars, so sleek they looked like they belonged in another universe. My son, the same boy who once begged me for an extra cookie before bedtime, was now listed in business magazines as one of the youngest billionaires in the country. And me, I remained in my modest home. I kept the same worn-out teapot, the same creaky wooden chairs in my kitchen, the same quiet life. I told myself I didn't need his riches. I didn't want to be swallowed by his world of money and power. But the truth, sometimes, late at night, I wondered if he felt ashamed of me. The divide between us grew deeper when he married. My daughter-in-law came from a wealthy family, and her presence only highlighted how different I was. She was polished, elegant, always dressed in designer clothes. When I visited, I often felt like an outsider at my own son's table. Her smile was polite, but her eyes told another story, one of quiet judgment. Still, Christmas was the one time of year that felt like a bridge between us. No matter how busy he was, no matter what deals he was closing, he always invited me to his mansion for the holidays. For me, Christmas was never about the gifts. It was about the rare chance to sit with him, to share laughter, to feel like family again. In the weeks leading up to this Christmas, I told myself it would be different. I baked the cookies he loved as a child, carefully packed them into tins, and wrapped them with ribbons. I knitted a scarf, just like my mother once did for me, even though I knew he probably wouldn't wear it. For me, these traditions carried meaning. For him, I wasn't sure anymore. I rehearsed little conversations in my head, wondering how I might remind him of our past, how I might spark that boyish smile I once knew so well. Would he remember the nights we stayed up late watching snowfall, sipping hot cocoa? Would he remember the time he gave me a paper star he had cut with his tiny hands, whispering, "For you, Mommy, because you're my Christmas star"? Sometimes, I clung to those memories because they were all I had left. But beneath my hope was also fear. Fear that this Christmas might be the same as the last, where gifts of gold watches and diamond bracelets were exchanged around me, and I was left clutching a token gift, something small, something meaningless. Fear that my daughter-in-law's sharp eyes would cut me down again, making me feel like a relic, unworthy of my son's new world. Still, I reminded myself, Christmas is about love, not wealth. I told myself this over and over, and yet, as I packed my overnight bag to leave for his mansion, I couldn't shake the quiet ache in my heart. I wanted nothing extravagant. I wanted no jewels, no cars, no money. All I wanted was recognition, respect, to be seen as his mother, not as an inconvenience or an obligation, but as someone who mattered. That as I boarded the car that would take me to his estate, I stared out at the falling snow and whispered a silent prayer. This year, please let Christmas bring us closer. Please let me feel like family again. Little did I know, this Christmas would not only bring me closer to the truth, but it would also shatter everything I thought I knew about my son, his wife, and the world they had built around themselves. The car rolled up the long driveway, its tires crunching softly over the snow. Even from a distance, the mansion stood like a palace against the night sky, glowing with thousands of twinkling lights, garlands wrapped around towering marble pillars, golden wreaths hung on every window, and a massive Christmas tree, visible even through the glass walls, sparkled with diamonds and ornaments so large they looked unreal. I stepped out of the car, clutching my small bag of homemade gifts, a tin of cookies, a knitted scarf, and a simple ornament I had crafted myself. In my hands, they felt heavy, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented. They were pieces of my world, small and humble, standing against the glittering backdrop of my son's empire. The butler, dressed in a crisp black suit, greeted me with a rehearsed smile. "Welcome, madam," he said, ushering me into the grand foyer. My breath caught as I looked around. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting off the marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. A string quartet played softly near the staircase, filling the air with elegant Christmas melodies. Guests mingled in the vast hall, business partners, influential figures, friends of my son and daughter, and people whose lives seemed 1,000 miles from mine. Women in designer gowns laughed as they sipped champagne, while men in tailored suits exchanged knowing handshakes. Everyone seemed to belong, except me. And then I saw him. My son stood near the fireplace, tall and confident, wearing a perfectly fitted suit that probably cost more than my entire year's income. He looked like the man I used to cradle in my arms, and yet so far removed I could barely recognize him. Still, my heart swelled. He was my boy, no matter what. "Mother," he said, striding over with a smile that felt more formal than warm. He kissed me lightly on the cheek. "Glad you could make it." His words were polite, but something about the way he said them cut into me. Glad you could make it, as if I were a guest, not his mother. And then, behind him, came her. My daughter-in-law, glided forward in a gown of shimmering silver, her hair arranged in perfect waves, her diamond earrings catching the light with every movement. Her beauty was undeniable, but so was the iciness in her gaze. She embraced me lightly, almost reluctantly, her perfume sharp and foreign. "How wonderful to see you again," she said, though her tone carried no warmth. Her eyes flicked to the bag in my hand, lingering just long enough for me to feel ashamed. I quickly clutched it closer to my chest. The evening unfolded with a kind of orchestrated perfection. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and waiters floated around with trays of delicacies I couldn't even name. I took a seat near the edge of the long dining table, where candles flickered beside golden cutlery. The tree loomed behind us, adorned with ornaments so extravagant that each could have paid my bills for a year. Family members arrived in waves. My son's younger cousins, spirited, spoiled, dressed in the latest fashion, greeted me with polite disinterest before running off to take pictures beside the tree. His uncle, a booming man with a red scarf, launched into loud tales about his latest investments. His aunt, a woman who wore pearls the size of grapes, leaned close to whispered gossip into her neighbor's ear. Everywhere I looked, there was extravagance, but beneath the glitter, I sensed an undercurrent, a stiffness in the way my son glanced at his wife, a forced laugh from one of the cousins, a silence that fell too quickly whenever I asked about family traditions. At one point, as the servants brought in roasted turkey on silver platters, I tried to share a small memory. "When he was a boy," I began, smiling at my son, "he used to sneak into the kitchen at midnight to steal cookies before Christmas morning." But before I could finish, my daughter-in-law interrupted. "Oh, how funny," she said, her voice tight. "But I don't think everyone wants to hear about childhood stories right now." Laughter rippled awkwardly around the table. My cheeks burned. My son gave a small shrug, as if to say, "Let it go." I lowered my eyes and focused on the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the cranberry sauce, placed delicately before me. But the food tasted like nothing. All I could taste was the growing bitterness in my heart. Then, as dinner plates were cleared, the true centerpiece of the night began. The gift exchange. The servants wheeled in carts piled high with boxes wrapped in gold foil and velvet ribbons. Guests clapped with delight, children squealed, and the air buzzed with excitement. One by one, Gifts were exchanged: diamond bracelets, luxury watches, rare wines, trips to Paris. Each gift seemed more extravagant than the last. Each met with gasps and applause, and all the while, I sat quietly, clutching the small tin of cookies on my lap, wondering if my son even remembered the gifts I brought. It was then that I noticed something strange. My daughter-in-law kept glancing at me with a nervous edge. Her fingers tapped against her wine glass, her smile too tight, her posture too rigid. She whispered something into my son's ear, and he nodded, his eyes flicking toward me briefly before returning to the pile of gifts. A chill ran through me. I couldn't explain it, but I felt something looming. Something was about to happen. Finally, after what felt like hours, my son stood up, holding a small envelope in his hand. The room quieted. All eyes turned to him. "This," he said, his voice strong, "is for my mother." The words I had been longing for, the recognition I had prayed for. My heart leaped with hope. Maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different. I reached out with trembling hands as he placed the envelope before me. The guests leaned in, anticipation buzzing in the air. My son, the billionaire, the powerful man, admired by all, was giving something to his mother. Surely, it had to be extraordinary. I opened it. Inside, there was a single dollar bill. The room fell silent. My breath caught. My fingers froze. My eyes darted to my son's face, searching for an explanation, but his expression was unreadable. And then, I looked at my daughter. Her face had turned pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't place: fear, shock, maybe even guilt. And that's when I knew this was no ordinary gift. This was the beginning of something much darker. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fingers clutched the crisp dollar bill as though it was some kind of cruel joke. The golden light from the chandeliers flickered above me, casting long shadows across the table. But all I could see was that single piece of paper lying in my lap. A billionaire's mother given $1 at Christmas. A hollow silence filled the room, pressing against my chest. Forks and knives were set down quietly, glasses half raised and forgotten. The string quartet in the corner continued playing, but even their music felt awkward now, like background noise for a tragedy. I forced my lips into a weak smile. "Oh, how thoughtful," I murmured, my voice breaking slightly. I tried to sound gracious, tried to hold my dignity, but the weight of humiliation burned hot in my chest. My cheeks flushed, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Around the table, guests shifted uncomfortably. One of my son's cousins coughed into his napkin to hide a laugh. A young woman across the table leaned closer to her companion and whispered, not nearly softly enough, "Did he really just—" The uncle with the booming voice cleared his throat, his booming laughter replaced with an uneasy chuckle. "Ah, well, perhaps it's symbolic," he suggested, raising his glass as though trying to restore some sense of normalcy. No one raised theirs in return. I glanced at my son. He sat calmly, his expression unreadable, sipping his wine as though nothing unusual had occurred. My heart twisted. "Why, my child, why would you do this?" Then, I caught sight of her, my daughter-in-law. She sat perfectly still, her smile frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped her champagne glass. Her face had lost its color, her eyes darting between me and my son, as though silently begging him to say something. Her usual poise was gone, replaced with a tension that spread across her whole body. The whispers grew louder. "Is this a prank? Maybe it's part of something bigger, unbelievable." Heat rushed to my face. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground and escape the suffocating stares. Yet I sat there, clutching the dollar, my pride fighting with my pain. Finally, I gathered the courage to speak. "Thank you," I said, though my voice trembled. "I appreciate the thought." But even as the words left my mouth, I hated myself for saying them. Why was I thanking him for humiliating me in front of his friends, his family, his wife? My chest ached with the weight of betrayal. My son gave a small nod, his expression as cold as stone. "It's what I could manage," he said simply. The words cut deeper than the gift itself. What he could manage. The man who had bought a $20 million yacht last summer, who wore watches encrusted with diamonds, who owned more cars than he could drive, was telling me this was all he could manage. The table shifted uncomfortably again. Glasses clinked faintly as people pretended to sip, eyes flicking anywhere but in my direction. But the silence kept returning, heavier each time. And still, my daughter-in-law's mask kept slipping. She leaned close to my son, whispering something urgently. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. She tried again, this time her hand resting on his arm. But he pulled away, just enough for me to notice. Her nervousness was impossible to ignore. She tapped her perfectly manicured nails against the stem of her glass, her gaze darting like a trapped bird. Every so often, her eyes met mine and quickly looked away, as if I had seen too much. It struck me then, this wasn't just about the dollar. Something deeper lurked beneath the surface, something my daughter-in-law was desperate to keep hidden. As the dinner dragged on, conversation returned in fits and starts. Guests spoke louder than usual, forcing laughter, trying to bury the tension under noise. But no matter how much they tried, the unease lingered like smoke. One of the cousins asked my son about his latest business deal, but even that felt hollow. My son answered with practiced ease, yet I noticed the slight stiffness in his voice. His wife sipped her drink too quickly, her hand trembling just enough that a drop of champagne spilled onto the white linen tablecloth. She dabbed it hastily with a napkin, her face still pale. And me, I sat silently, my mind spinning. Why had my son done this? Was it punishment, a message, or had he been forced somehow? When the final plates were cleared and dessert was served, I barely touched mine. The peppermint souffle sat untouched as I stared at the dollar folded neatly on the table beside me. It felt like a scar, a wound carved into the night. Then, a laugh broke out from one of the guests, brittle and forced. "Well, isn't Christmas full of surprises?" he said, raising his glass again. But no one laughed with him. Instead, I noticed a look shared between my son and his wife, brief, sharp, filled with unspoken words. She looked terrified, he looked resigned, and in that silent exchange, I understood something important. This gift wasn't random, it wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. I swallowed hard, my eyes returning to the dollar. My humiliation was only the beginning. Something darker, something hidden, was waiting just beyond the edges of this glittering night. And as I watched my daughter-in-law fidget nervously, her facade cracking more with every passing second, I knew that Christmas was about to unravel in ways no one at that table expected. The dinner continued, but the mood never fully recovered. The clinking of silverware against porcelain sounded louder than usual, as though everyone was deliberately trying to fill the silence with noise. Laughter returned in fragments, brittle, easily broken. I sat quietly, pushing my food around my plate, but my attention was everywhere. My son spoke calmly, his tone detached, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment he handed me that envelope. A billionaire, giving his mother a single dollar. It wasn't a gift, it was a message, and messages, I knew, always had meaning. I noticed small things first, the way my daughter-in-law kept touching her phone under the table, her screen lighting up briefly before she quickly turned it face down, the way she leaned in close to whisper in my son's ear, only to be met with a tight jaw and a curt shake of his head, the way her smile appeared too wide, too polished, every time someone looked her way. Then, there were the whispers. From across the room, two of the cousins whispered behind manicured hands, glancing in my direction. One of them stifled a laugh before her mother shot her a warning glare. Another relative excused himself from the table to take a phone call, his voice muffled but urgent as he paced near the hall. I caught fragments. "Can't delay anymore. And she doesn't know yet," before he vanished into another room. The air grew thick with secrets. At one point, I excused myself to fetch water from the side table, and as I passed through the corridor, I noticed a stack of documents on a small desk near the study door. They were half covered with a silk scarf, as if hidden in haste. My eyes skimmed the top page. Legal letterhead, bold typeface. I couldn't read all of it, but one phrase jumped out before the scarf was swiftly pulled over it again by a servant who appeared suddenly, bowing politely. "Inheritance dispute." The words burned into my mind as I returned to the table. Inheritance? What inheritance? My husband, God rest his soul, had left us little more than memories and modest savings, so whose inheritance could possibly be under discussion here? The puzzle pieces shifted uneasily in my head. The dollar bill, my son's cold demeanor, my daughter-in-law's pale face, documents whispering of inheritance. Something was unraveling, and I was at the center of it, whether I wanted to be or not. The evening grew heavier with drama as side conversations spiraled at the far end of the table. My son's uncle argued with his wife about a failed business venture. "You said it was secure," he hissed, his voice low but not low enough. She snapped back, "Don't you dare put this on me." Their bickering drew quick, nervous glances from the guests seated nearby. Two cousins nearly came to blows over who had received the more extravagant gift. One flaunted a new designer necklace, while the other complained bitterly that her smaller diamond earrings showed clear favoritism. Their father had to step in, his face red with embarrassment. I watched it all with a heavy heart. The wealth around me glittered, but beneath the surface was nothing but cracks, jealousy, greed, resentment. It was a far cry from the simple Christmas gatherings of my childhood, where the loudest argument was over who got the last gingerbread cookie. And yet, even with all the chaos swirling around, my attention kept returning to my daughter. She excused herself more than once, slipping away to the hallway for hushed phone calls. Each time she returned, her smile seemed more brittle, her eyes darting nervously toward my son. Once, when she thought no one was watching, she pressed her palms to her temples and exhaled shakily before pasting the smile back on. I wasn't the only one who noticed. One of the older aunts leaned across the table and whispered to me, "She's hiding something, mark my words." I nodded faintly, my heart pounding. Later in the evening, as guests migrated toward the massive Christmas tree for photographs, I lingered near the staircase. From my vantage point, I caught a glimpse of my son and his wife in a heated exchange near the study. "I told you, not tonight," he hissed, his voice low but sharp. "We can't keep putting it off," she whispered back, her hands clutching his arm. "She's going to find out sooner or later." "Enough," he snapped, pulling away. Not another word. Before I could hear more, footsteps approached, and I quickly turned toward the tree, pretending to admire an ornament. My heart raced. She's going to find out sooner or later. Was I the she? As the evening drew on, I began to piece together fragments like a puzzle with missing edges. The dollar bill wasn't about stinginess or insult, it was tied to something larger. The inheritance documents, the tense phone calls, the whispered arguments, the nervous glances, and beneath it all, my daughter-in-law's fear. She knew something. She was desperate to keep it hidden. And somehow, I was the key. By the time dessert plates were cleared and coffee was served, my suspicions had hardened into certainty. This Christmas wasn't about celebration. It was about secrets. And secrets, I knew, never stayed buried forever. I looked down at the dollar bill folded neatly in my purse. It no longer looked like a joke. It looked like a clue. The house was still buzzing with soft Christmas chatter, but my mind was far away. The laughter, the music, the faint clinking of glasses, it all felt muted, distant, like a radio playing in another room. I sat in that glittering mansion, with its marble floors and towering tree drenched in golden ornaments, but my heart was trapped somewhere else, back in time, in the small, drafty house where it had all begun. As I held that single dollar bill in my trembling hands, my chest ached with a pain I couldn't describe. It wasn't about the money, not the insult of being handed $1 by the son I had given everything to. It was about what that gesture meant. Did he forget everything I had done? Did he truly see me as so worthless, so insignificant, that this was what my years of sacrifice had earned? I blinked, and suddenly, the Christmas lights blurred into the glow of a dim kitchen lamp from decades ago. I was young again, in my 20s, with 2 jobs to keep food on the table. I remembered coming home late at night, exhausted, with my shoes soaked through from the winter snow. My body was tired, but my heart always softened the moment I opened the door and saw him, my little boy, curled up on the couch waiting for me, his homework books scattered around, his head bobbing as sleep fought to take him. I would set my bag down, kneel beside him, and whisper, "Go to bed, sweetheart. Mama's here now." He would smile in his half-dreaming state, mumbling, "You're the best, Mama," before shuffling off to bed. Those words used to give me strength, enough to face another day, another shift, another sacrifice. I remembered the nights I went hungry so he could eat, the winters I wore the same worn-out coat because his growing body needed new ones every year. I remembered working overtime just so I could buy him the books he wanted, watching his eyes light up like Christmas morning every time he flipped the pages. And I remembered the pride I felt when he was accepted into university. The tuition fees had looked like mountains I could never climb, but somehow, I did. I took loans, I worked weekends, I pawned the only necklace my mother had left me, all because I wanted my son to stand tall in this world, to have opportunities I never did. And now here I was, years later, staring at the cruelest irony: a son who had become a billionaire, yet handed his mother a single dollar on Christmas Eve. My breath caught in my throat. Maybe I had done too much for him. Maybe, in shielding him from every hardship, I had made him forget the value of love, of sacrifice, of family. Had I raised a man who measured everything in dollars and cents, and nothing in kindness? The thought burned in my chest. I glanced around the table. Guests were laughing, sipping their wine, and chatting as if nothing unusual had happened. But I caught it the way a few cousins exchanged glances. The faint whisper of an aunt leaning into another's ear, their lips curling in disbelief. They saw what I saw. They knew this was no innocent mistake. My humiliation was now their entertainment. And then, my eyes landed on her. She looked pale, restless. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her wineglass. She wouldn't meet my gaze. In that instant, I knew she was hiding something. But what? My doubt deepened, not just in my son, but in myself. Had I failed as a mother? Was this cruel gesture his choice, or was it something larger, something I couldn't yet see? The memory of his childhood collided with the present, leaving me torn. I remembered the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, saying, "For you, Mama, because you deserve flowers every day." That sweet, innocent child, where had he gone? Was he buried under the weight of money, or was he still somewhere inside, silenced by greed and pride? I pressed the dollar tighter in my palm, as if squeezing it could give me answers. My mind swirled with flashbacks. His graduation day, how he hugged me, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you." The day he got his first big business deal, he had called me first, saying, "Mama, we made it. We're going to have everything we ever dreamed of." The Christmas when he surprised me with a simple, handmade card because he couldn't afford more. The card read, "One day, I'll give you the world." And yet, here I was, holding not the world, not even a piece of it, but one single, insulting dollar. My chest tightened. Doubt became guilt. Was it my fault? Had I spoiled him? Had I asked for too little, expected too little respect? I thought being silent and selfless was noble, but perhaps silence taught him that I didn't need appreciation, that I didn't deserve it. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. Not here, not in front of them, not in front of her. Because if there was one thing I knew, it was that my daughter-in-law's pale face meant this story was far from over. Something was wrong. Something bigger than a dollar bill was unfolding in this house. But in that moment, all I had was doubt. Doubt in my son, doubt in myself, doubt in the years I had poured my soul into. And as I stared at the dollar in my hand, one haunting question consumed me. Had I raised a man who had truly forgotten his mother? Or was this gift a clue to a secret I wasn't meant to see? The hour dragged on like a cruel joke. Every tick of the grandfather clock echoing louder than the music playing in the background. The laughter around the table had grown forced, brittle. My fingers still clutched the dollar bill like it was a shard of glass that had pierced straight through my heart. I couldn't sit in silence any longer. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor, the sound sharp and unforgiving in the vast dining hall. Heads turned toward me, forks froze midair, and conversations dissolved into a tense hush. The warmth of the Christmas lights seemed to dim under the weight of my resolve. I looked directly at my son. My voice was steady, though my chest trembled inside. "Tell me," I began, holding the dollar aloft for all to see, "is this what a mother's love is worth to you?" Gasps fluttered around the table. The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to look at me, at him, or at their untouched plates. My son leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. His designer suit gleamed in the golden light, and for a moment, he looked more like a stranger than the boy I had raised. "Mother," he said smoothly, his tone dripping with condescension, "it's just a joke. Why take it so seriously? You always told me not to value money too much, remember?" A ripple of uneasy laughter tried to rise from the guests, but it quickly died when I didn't move, didn't smile. A joke. My voice cracked, though not from weakness, from fury. "You gave me $1 in front of everyone on Christmas. Do you understand the humiliation you've caused?" His smirk hardened into something colder. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing like a predator's. "Humiliation, Mother? You live in my house, eat at my table, enjoy the luxuries I provide, and you dare lecture me about humiliation?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, sharper. "Without me, you'd still be scrubbing floors in some run-down apartment." The words sliced through me. My breath hitched, and my vision blurred for a moment. I heard a murmur ripple through the crowd, shocked whispers, sharp intakes of breath. Even his closest friends shifted uneasily, their gazes darting between us. I steadied myself, forcing my voice to rise above the crackle of tension. "Without you," I said, my tone trembling but loud. "Do you forget who put food in your mouth when I had none for myself? Do you forget the loans I took, the nights I starved, the sacrifices I made so you could stand where you are today." My son's eyes flickered, just for a second, with something guilt, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He scoffed, tossing his napkin onto the table. "You act like you built my empire," he sneered. "You didn't. I did. And maybe it's time you stopped clinging to the past. This is my life now, and you need to learn your place in it." The words "your place" rang in my ears like a death knell. My place. To him, I was not a mother anymore. I was a burden, a decoration, a pawn to be humiliated. Around the table, people exchanged looks, some horrified, others fascinated, as though watching a play unfold. But my gaze shifted and landed on her. My daughter-in-law. She sat stiffly, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a trembling line. She wouldn't meet my eyes, wouldn't look at her husband either. She stared down at the table, the weight of some hidden truth pulling her lower and lower into her chair. "Why don't you speak, dear?" I said suddenly, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The room gasped again, all eyes swiveling to her. Her shoulders jerked slightly, and for a moment I thought she would spill whatever secret was burning inside her. But she shook her head quickly, her eyes darting to my son in panic. He noticed, his hand slammed down on the table with a thunderous crack, making the cutlery jump. "Enough," he roared, his face twisted with rage. "You don't get to interrogate my wife, not in my house." His arrogance, his defensiveness, his fury was all unraveling now, his polished image cracking like glass under pressure. I stood taller, refusing to back down. "I am not here to interrogate. I am here to understand. To understand why my own flesh and blood would hand me $1 and call it love." His face reddened, veins standing out in his neck. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash another tirade, but the sound of his wife's stifled sob cut through the air. Everyone froze. The trembling woman finally lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes darting between me and her husband. Her lips quivered as if words were fighting to escape, but fear held them prisoner. "Don't you dare," my son growled, pointing a warning finger at her. Not a word. The tension was unbearable now, the air thick and suffocating. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others unable to tear their eyes from the unfolding storm. I leaned across the table, my gaze burning into my son's. "What are you hiding from me?" He pushed back his chair violently, the legs screeching against the marble floor. Standing tall, he towered over me, his arrogance radiating like poison. "You think you're owed something," he spat. "You're owed nothing. Not respect, not gratitude, not wealth. You're just an old woman living off my success." Gasps echoed again, sharper this time. His cruelty was no longer masked. It was raw, unveiled. And then I saw it, my daughter-in-law's hands trembling harder, her lips parting as a single word slipped out, barely audible but heavy enough to shake the room. "Stop it" was the crack in the dam, the beginning of something bigger. But for now, the confrontation hung in the air like smoke after a fire, ugly, suffocating, unresolved, and I knew the truth was clawing its way to the surface, no matter how hard my son tried to bury it. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The Christmas lights twinkled faintly, their cheerful glow mocking the storm raging at the dinner table. My son stood rigid, fury blazing in his eyes. I, his mother, sat tall despite the weight in my chest. And beside him, my daughter-in-law trembled like a leaf caught in a winter storm. Her lips moved again, barely a whisper. "Stop!" The sound cracked the silence. All eyes turned to her. She clutched her napkin in shaking fists, her knuckles bone white. "Enough of this," my son snapped, his voice harsh and commanding. She has nothing to say, but her eyes finally lifted, meeting mine. Tears glistened, their tears of guilt, of shame, of truth clawing to get out. I can't do this anymore," she choked, her voice breaking. "She deserves to know." The air turned heavy, every guest leaning in, anticipation written on their faces. My son's hand slammed onto the table again, rattling the crystal glasses. "Not a word," he growled, his voice sharp enough to slice the tension. But the dam had already cracked. My daughter-in-law sobbed, covering her face before blurting out the words that would shatter everything. "The dollar, it's in the will." The room erupted, shocked gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping, as people turned toward her. My chest tightened as her confession pierced the air. "In the will," I repeated, my voice hollow. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. He had the lawyers draft it. The dollar gift isn't just a joke, it's symbolic. He made it legally binding. He wanted it to be in writing that his mother was left with nothing. The world tilted around me. For a moment, I thought I might faint. Left with nothing. Every sacrifice, every meal I'd skipped, every sleepless night I had endured, for him all dismissed with a single dollar. My throat burned, my hands trembling as I clutched the bill tighter, as though it might give me strength. The room broke into chaos. Relatives gasped and whispered. Some muttered words of outrage, others shook their heads in disbelief. My sister-in-law clutched her chest and whispered, "How could he?" while a cousin hissed, "That's beyond cruel." But my son only stood taller, defiant, his jaw locked. "She doesn't understand," he barked. "This is business. This is my legacy. I can't have greedy hands tearing it apart after I'm gone." Greedy. My voice cracked as I rose from my seat. "You call your own mother greedy? I never asked for your money. All I ever wanted was your respect or love, and you chose to humiliate me in front of the world." He sneered. "Respect isn't owed, Mother. You always made me believe life was about sacrifice and hard work. But the truth is, power is what matters, control is what matters, and now I have both." The words chilled me to my bones, but my daughter-in-law wasn't finished. Her sobs shook her as she forced herself to speak. "It's not just the will. He told me if I ever breathed a word, he'd cut me off too. That's why I've stayed quiet. But I can't watch this anymore. I can't keep living this lie." My son turned on her, his face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful enough," she cried, her voice louder than I'd ever heard it. She stood, shaking but resolute, her tears glistening in the light. "You think money makes you untouchable, but everyone here sees who you truly are. A man so desperate for power he'd humiliate the very woman who gave him life." The guests erupted, some standing in outrage, others speaking over one another. The atmosphere was electric, charged with fury and disbelief. One uncle slammed his fist against the table. "A mother deserves honor, not this disgrace." Another whispered to his wife, "I always knew he was arrogant, but this is evil." I stood frozen in the middle of it all, my body trembling, my heart shattering, and then, as the chaos roared around us, my daughter-in-law turned to me, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid. He controls everything, our lives, our future. But now, you know. Now, everyone knows." Her confession hit me harder than any insult my son had thrown. The truth was laid bare, exposed for all to see. I turned back to him, my voice steady, though my hands shook. "Do you hate me so much? To reduce me to this, a single dollar in your empire?" For the first time that night, his mask faltered. He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted, his mouth tightened, his eyes darted toward the guests. He knew the tide had turned. His arrogance could no longer shield him, but his silence was as damning as his words. The family was divided, some still loyal to him, others enraged by his cruelty. But the seed had been planted, doubt had been sown. His perfect image was crumbling before everyone's eyes, and I, though broken, though humiliated, felt a strange flicker of strength deep inside me, because now the truth was out. The $1 gift was no joke. It was a weapon, a legal dagger he had pointed at my heart, but he had underestimated me. Christmas was supposed to be about love, about family, about giving. Yet in that mansion, under the golden glow of the tree, the truth revealed something else entirely. It revealed betrayal. It revealed greed. It revealed the heart of a son who had turned his back on his mother. And as the room simmered with outrage and whispers, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This fight was far from over. The dining hall no longer felt like a place of celebration. The golden Christmas lights that once sparkled cheerfully now seemed to flicker with unease. Shadows stretching long and jagged across the marble floor. The music had stopped, replaced by a chorus of gasps, murmurs, and raised voices. The truth had ripped through the room like a knife, leaving nothing but exposed wounds and raw nerves. I stood at the center of it all, clutching the crumpled dollar bill in my trembling hand. My heart ached as though it had been shattered into 1,000 shards. But beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred, something harder, sharper, a strength I didn't know I still had. Around me, the family erupted. "How could you?" One cousin shouted at my son, her voice breaking. "Your own mother. This is unforgivable," an uncle muttered, shaking his head as he pushed back from the table. Another relative, loyal to my son, tried to defend him. He's protecting his legacy. You don't understand the world of business. But the words only fueled the chaos. Arguments clashed like thunder, dividing the family down invisible lines. Some rose to their feet, voices trembling with anger. Others wept quietly, unable to comprehend the cruelty of it all. And in the midst of the storm, my son's composure began to crack. Enough, he bellowed, slamming his fist against the table. The crystal glasses rattled, but his voice no longer commanded the room as it once had. The authority he wore like armor was slipping, dented and rusted by the weight of his own actions. You don't know the full story, he snapped, his eyes darting from face to face, searching desperately for loyalty. You think this is cruelty. It's strategy. A man with my wealth has enemies. I have to protect my empire from vultures, from lawsuits, from greedy relatives who'd tear it apart the moment I'm gone. That's all this is business. But his words rang hollow. The family wasn't buying it anymore. Business? My sister-in-law hissed. You call leaving your mother a $1 business? That's not protection, it's betrayal. The daughter-in-law sobbed softly beside him, her tears now unstoppable. She whispered, they all see it now. They all know. My son shot her a glare so sharp it could cut glass. But even that lost its edge in the face of so many witnesses. His power wasn't absolute anymore. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice to carry above the clamor. You speak of strategy, of enemies. But tell me, son, when did your mother become your enemy? When did the woman who raised you, who gave up everything for you, become someone you needed to humiliate and destroy? Silence followed, heavy, suffocating silence. My words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, choking him where he stood. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. His arrogance faltered, his mask slipping further with every heartbeat. The family was watching him now with new eyes that no longer admired, but judged. The mighty billionaire, once the pride of the family, was unraveling before them. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not now, not in front of him. Instead, I felt that flicker of strength grow stronger. I had spent years bending under the weight of sacrifice, of silence, of humility. But tonight, under the glittering lights of his mansion, something inside me straightened. I would not be his victim. The murmurs grew louder, voices rising in condemnation. An aunt crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me, whispering, you deserved better. Another relative, usually quiet, shouted across the table, shame on you. On Christmas, of all days. My son's face twisted with rage, but also something else, fear. For the first time, he was losing control. His empire of pride and arrogance was crumbling, not in the boardroom, not in the stock market, but right here, in the eyes of his own family. You're all turning against me, he roared. After everything I've built, everything I've given you. Fine, go on, judge me, but don't forget, you still live in my shadow. Without me, none of you would be sitting here in this mansion. His words echoed, but they no longer landed. The spell was broken. The family wasn't dazzled by his wealth anymore. They saw him clearly now, a man drunk on power, blinded by greed, desperate to maintain control. I finally found my voice again, steady and firm. You're wrong, son. Without you, we'd still have each other. But without us, what do you have? Money, power, empty walls, and hollow victories. You think you've won, but tonight, you've lost something greater than you'll ever understand. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists. But he didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth was louder than his voice, heavier than his wealth, sharper than his pride. The family's anger reached its peak. Some stormed out, unable to stay in the same room as him. Others surrounded me, offering comfort, solidarity, their anger fueling my strength. Tears streaked their faces, but their voices carried a new unity. You're not alone, one said firmly. We stand with you. You raised him better than this. Don't blame yourself, another added. And in that moment, I realized something. Yes, my son had humiliated me. Yes, my heart was shattered. But in exposing his cruelty, I had gained something far more powerful than his approval. I had gained the truth. And with truth came strength. My son sat back down, his face pale, his eyes hollow. For once, he had no words. No wealth could shield him. No arrogance could silence the whispers. He was still rich, still powerful. But tonight, his control had slipped through his fingers. And me, I was still broken, still hurting, but stronger than I had been in years. Because now, the family saw. Now, they knew. And no matter what he tried next, the tide had already turned. The room was still vibrating with the echoes of the chaos that had just unfolded. My son stood there, pale and shaken, while the rest of the family whispered among themselves. The betrayal had finally come to light, and with it, a tidal wave of emotions swept through every corner of that grand, glittering Christmas mansion. Yet, amidst the tears and accusations, something unexpected happened. Clarity. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of silence, sacrifices, and heartbreak lift from my chest. The truth was out, and now it was time for justice to take its rightful place. The lawyer who had been silently observing the entire debacle finally stepped forward with the thick envelope my son had hoped no one would ever see. He explained, calmly and professionally, that the $1 bill had not been an innocent gift. It had been a cruel legal maneuver. My son had drawn up documents trying to strip me of rights to family assets and future inheritance, making the dollar a symbolic settlement. The room gasped. The gasps turned into murmurs, and the murmurs into shouts. "How could you do this to your own mother?" an uncle cried out. My son tried to defend himself, muttering something about business and protecting wealth, but his words crumbled under the weight of the truth. The final blow came when my daughter-in-law stepped forward, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with tears. She admitted she had been pressured into silence, forced to go along with my son's schemes, but guilt had eaten away at her every day. Tonight, she couldn't stay quiet any longer. "She's your mother," she sobbed. "How could you humiliate her like this? You've turned wealth into a weapon." In that moment, the entire family seemed to shift. For years, everyone had walked on eggshells around my son, blinded by his money, dazzled by his power. But now, they saw him for what he truly was, someone willing to discard love and loyalty for control. One by one, relatives came to my side. My younger daughter, who had quietly endured her brother's arrogance, embraced me and whispered, "You don't deserve this. Mom, we'll stand with you." My nieces and nephews, who had once idolized their wealthy cousin, turned away from him in disappointment. Even my son's own wife, his supposed Alice, stood with me, choosing honesty over complicity. My son, once the center of every gathering, now stood utterly alone. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone to defend him, but the silence was deafening. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one who felt small. He was. Later that night, after the shouting had calmed and the papers were handed over to the lawyer for safekeeping, I found myself sitting by the fireplace. The mansion still glittered with Christmas lights, but the glow felt different now, no longer tainted by humiliation. I thought back to everything that had led us here. The endless nights I had worked, the sacrifices I had made so my son could study, build connections, and rise to the top. I hadn't asked for much, just love, respect, and the warmth of family. Yet, he had given me $1, thinking it would erase decades of devotion. But here's the thing. No piece of paper, no amount of money, can erase a mother's love. And tonight proved that no scheme can erase the truth, either. In the weeks that followed, my son's empire began to crack. The story of what he had tried to do spread quickly, first among family, then among friends, and eventually, into his business circles. Investors pulled away, wary of trusting someone who would deceive his own blood. Clients canceled contracts, unwilling to tie their reputations to his name. Ironically, the fortune he had fought so hard to protect became the very thing that slipped through his fingers. He had built his empire on fear and manipulation. But when love and trust evaporated, the foundation collapsed, and while I felt sorrow watching him stumble, I also felt a strange sense of peace. It was his own choices, not mine, that had led him here. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or contracts, it comes from the natural consequences of cruelty. Surprisingly, it was my daughter-in-law who grew closest to me in the months that followed. Her confession that night had changed everything. She apologized countless times, but I assured her I didn't hold her silence against her. "Fear makes people do things they regret," I told her gently. "But courage like you showed that night is what sets things right." She visited often, helping me with errands, sharing meals, and even decorating my modest little home when the next holiday season came around. She told me she had realized wealth without compassion was meaningless, and though her marriage with my son strained and eventually fractured, she rebuilt her life with dignity and a clear conscience. That as I look back now, I realized that Christmas night wasn't just about betrayal. It was about awakening. My son gave me $1, hoping to belittle me. Instead, he gave me clarity, the priceless realization that family should never be measured in money, but in love, respect, and loyalty. I may not have billions in my bank account, but I am rich in the ways that matter, in resilience, in truth, and in the love of those who chose to stand by me when it counted. And so, as I sat by the fireplace 1 year later, surrounded by laughter, genuine hugs, and the smell of home-cooked food, I whispered to myself, the smell of home-cooked food, I whispered to myself, you can strip me of wealth, you can try to take away dignity, but you cannot erase the strength of a mother's heart. That was the real gift of Christmas, not money, not mansions, but the power of truth, and the reminder that no betrayal can outshine the light of love.